This was the Japanese cavalry sweeping through Southeast Asia. They carried rifles on their backs and rode bicycles, charging into the jungle where the Indian troops were. Faced with the dense bullets of the Japanese, the Indian soldiers were terrified and scattered in all directions. The Indian soldiers in the rear camp heard the gunfire and quickly brought out heavy weapons. They then rushed into the jungle and fired at the Japanese to stop their advance. The Japanese were caught off guard and suffered heavy casualties instantly. But once they recovered, they immediately brought out mortars to counterattack. Although the Indian troops had good weapons, they were still scared and dropped their weapons to run away. Soon the Japanese stormed into the camp. But at that moment, the British troops hiding in the cornfield began indiscriminate mortar attacks. The Japanese had nowhere to hide and were thrown into chaos, forcing them to retreat back into the jungle. The situation turned around instantly. The Indian troops, who had just retreated, saw this and began to chase the Japanese, inflicting heavy casualties. After a fierce battle, the surviving Japanese soldiers had no choice but to surrender. Just as the Indian troops were rejoicing over their victory, the British higher-ups called and ordered these British Indian troops to surrender to the Japanese. All the soldiers couldn't believe it, and even the Japanese who had surrendered were stunned. The Indian officer was the first to raise his hands and surrender, and the other soldiers followed suit, laying down their weapons and raising their hands. It turned out that the negotiations between the Japanese and the British had concluded, and the British higher-ups decided to abandon Singapore and surrender unconditionally. In this way, 90,000 British Indian troops surrendered to 20,000 Japanese soldiers. Subsequently, the Japanese marched into the city. They claimed to help India break free from colonial rule and intended to form an Indian army that would serve Japan, increasing their military presence in the Asian battlefield. Soon after, Indian anti-British fighters announced the establishment of a provisional government of Free India. But India had been colonized for over 80 years, and some soldiers had already come to see themselves as British. To persuade these Indian troops, the Japanese brought 50 cows. The Indian soldiers, unable to resist their love for cows, immediately agreed to serve the Japanese. In this way, an Indian national army subordinate to the Japanese was established, with the anti-British fighter serving as the head of state. He began to massively recruit Indians into the army and even enlisted women to expand the military force. After brief training, they were sent to the front lines. Soon, this Indian army had grown to a scale of 90,000 soldiers. However, on the train to the front lines, two British fighter planes took advantage of the night and suddenly attacked. They instantly destroyed the Japanese train, causing heavy casualties among the Indian troops before they could even reach the front. One Indian soldier grabbed an anti-aircraft machine gun and fired frantically at the attacking planes, eventually managing to shoot down one of them. The other plane quickly fled. The Indian National Army officer, seeing the heavy casualties among his comrades, was filled with intense hatred for the British forces. Soon, the Indian troops sounded the horn for a counterattack, and a major battle against the British forces officially began.